Hi, this is a brief introduction to Chapter 26, which introduces us to the business cycle and unemployment and inflation, which are key items of helping to understand the macro economy. In thinking about the economy, it's a big, huge, complex thing, if you will. People interacting in daily transactions. You go buy milk at the store or pay for gasoline, or IBM starts a new product line, or the federal government decides to build a new highway. All these things interact to create the macro economy. Millions and millions of decisions being made every day. That is our macro economy. So think of it kind of this teeming organism, if you will, of things going on. Well, like any organism, it develops diseases from time to time. It would be nice if we just had a long-term trend in economic growth. If you look on page 518 in your textbook, figure 25.5, back in the economic growth chapter, you see this general long upward trend in GDP in the United States. And the United States has been a very fortunate country economically that we've generally always experienced economic growth. So the long-term trend in the United States is an upward trend in GDP. However, you'll also note that there are hiccups along the way of our upward trend, that sometimes we go into downturns. The economy goes into what we call a recession, and the economy actually shrinks. And during these periods, people lose their jobs, businesses lose money, households lose income, and we kind of have to dig our way out of this kind of hole. And eventually, as you see from the trends, we do dig ourselves out of this hole eventually. The trend is an upward trend, but there are potholes along the way. So what we're trying to do in this chapter is kind of define what we mean by a recession. What is that? Another aspect of economic illness is inflation, when prices get a little bit out of hand. And so we also have to worry about that. So both sides of the page are unemployment, where people lose their jobs, and inflation, where prices get a little too high, and again, we lose purchasing power. So let's go back to this. So business cycle. So how do we define a business cycle? Well, basically, there's four pieces to a business cycle. There's the peak, and then, as many of you may have paid attention, in late 2007, we kind of hit our peak, because starting in late 2007 into 2008, there's a whole list of reasons of what happened, starting with home values and mortgages and financial businesses. But in any event, what happened was we started going into a recession. People started spending less money, businesses spent less money, people started losing their job, businesses lost profits, banks went out of business. All this happened through 2008 into 2009. We had a recession, and GDP in the United States actually shrank. So that's the recession. So we went from a peak into a downturn. Hopefully we've hit a trough. And now, beginning in late 2009, early 2010, now we're working on an expansion where we're kind of digging our way out of the ditch, and the economy is growing again, if somewhat slowly, but it is at least not shrinking anymore. It is actually growing. So those are the four pieces of the business cycle. There's the peak, the recession, the trough, and then finally expansion. Why do business cycles happen? Well, one of the biggest impacts on things tend to be shocks, meaning things that happen unexpectedly. So one of the biggest unexpected events that happened recently was the drop in housing values. The underlying assumption to the whole mess was that housing values never went down. So people kind of went crazy in investing in housing, and it's kind of the classic, what they call, investment bubble. And think of a soap bubble. Like all bubbles, eventually they pop. And this one popped, and house values plummeted, and people lost a lot of their wealth. Well, that was a huge shock to the system, and that's what ultimately caused the recession. Other types of things could be a big jump in oil prices, or there could be political catastrophes around the world that cause economic recessions. All kinds of things. But almost always, it tends to be some kind of shock to the system, meaning a huge unexpected event. All right, so let's move on. All right, so that's business cycle. So unemployment. How do we define unemployment? Unemployment is based on what we mean by the labor force. In other words, If you think the entire population of the United States, well, that's not really the labor force, because, you know, think of babies and toddlers. Well, they're not really capable of working, so they're not in the labor force 'cause they can't work. How about somebody who's 85 or 90 who's retired? Well, they're not really capable of working, so they're not in the labor force either. So what we mean by the labor force are people who are essentially 16 years or older and are willing and able and want to work. That's really what the labor force means. And to be a bit more specific, we define it as the civilian labor force, because everybody who's in the military, by definition, has a job. So let's put them over in the military, and let's take everybody else and say, are you looking for work? If you have a job, you're employed. Are you looking for work and you can't find a job? You're unemployed. So unemployed are people who are willing and able, 16 years or older, who are looking for work and can't find them. If you're a full-time student, you're not seeking work, you're not part of the labor force. You're choosing to not be looking for work. Let's say you're a stay-at-home mom or dad. You're not in the labor force because you're not looking for work. So we don't count you in the labor force. So the unemployment statistics only are the percentage of willing and able who are looking for work who can't find it. That's our definition. The official unemployment statistics, which we hear all the time, and unemployment right now is around 8%, a little higher than 8%, which means 8% of all those who want to work, there's 8% of them who cannot find work. That's a fairly high number. We'd like to see that number to be around more like 4.5% or to 5%. So it's a good 60%, 50% higher than we want it to be. So we have right now what we call high unemployment. But even that number might be understated a bit, because how about people who quit looking? They're so discouraged they quit looking. Well, they're not counted in the unemployment statistics. Yet they're really unemployed, we just don't count them because you're not looking. How about people who found jobs but it's a part-time job, but they'd really rather have a full-time job? Well, they're counted as employed, so they're not part of the unemployment, but yet they're really not fully employed, so they're really kind of part of the unemployed. And then finally, how about people who are underemployed? Maybe let's say, an engineer who's working as a waiter someplace. Well, they're fully employed as a waiter, so they're not counted as unemployed, but we're not really using all their skills. Why do we care about all this? Well, what is the real cost of unemployment is the lost output. We have resources. Thinking about our production possibilities curve, we want to be on the production possibilities curve, meaning we're using all our resources. When we have unemployment, that means we're at a point inside the production possibilities curve. We're not fully utilizing all resources, so we're not producing all the output we could be producing. That means we're not earning all the incomes we could be earning. That means people go without things that they could be enjoying and having. So that's the real cost of unemployment, is the lost output. Also, the cost of unemployment is people who would like to work but can't find work. Creates all kinds of stresses in human emotions. Divorce rates go up, spouse abuse goes up, drug abuse goes up, alcoholism goes up. All these things are affected by crime rates go up. All these things are affected by high unemployment. So society pays a price as well. Switching gears real quick. Inflation. Why do we care about inflation? That's the other illness our organism, the macroeconomy, can deal with. Inflation deals with, well, what happens when prices rise too quickly, or they're rising in a very fast fashion. Historically, for the last 20, 25 years, if you look at the trend rates in inflation, we've had really very little inflation for the last 20 or 25 years. So our economy has not suffered from inflation. Inflation of around 2% per year is considered to be pretty low-grade inflation. Prices are going up, but by a very small amount. So it doesn't cause a lot of trouble. Big problems with inflation would be, say you had inflation rates of 15, 20, 25, 30%, prices going up by 20 or 25% every year. What that would be doing would be destroying purchasing power of our dollar. And who that affects more particularly would be savers. So you put $1 in the bank today, you draw it out 10 years from now. Well, with high inflation means the dollar you pull out 10 years from now can buy far less than the dollar you put in the bank. So you're damaged by inflation if you save money. On the other hand, if you borrow money, that actually helps you because the money you get today is worth more than the money you're paying back in the future. So it tends to help borrowers, hurts savers. Ultimately, that affects people's incentive to save, and that can ultimately hurt the economy. So inflation destroys purchasing power, and so it's something we also have to be wary of. So those are the two diseases, if you will, of our organism. We've got unemployment, which produces lost output and all kinds of social pain, and then inflation, which is high prices, which destroys purchasing power. So that's what chapter 26 is all about.